I'm not a racist, preach the teacher. You still they never had this. Number one, never wanna run about the gun. I wasn't licensed to have one. The minute they see me, fear me. I'm the epitome, a public enemy. Use, abuse, without clues. I refuse to blow fuse. They even had it on the news. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Back when I wrote y'all, yes.
I listen to nonfiction on audiobooks because it's mostly information. I read novels because that awakens my imagination. But now that I'm walking, there's so much out there that we should be digesting. And she's been on before, but I wanted to have her back on close to election because I do believe that white women are the answer. And it's up to white women to stand up for themselves, not just for us. But in her book, there's some insight into why that may not be happening. Her book is called The White Bonus: 5 Families and the Cash Value of Racism in America, which we talked about before. Let me welcome back Tracie McMillan to the Karen Hunter Show. Hi.
Hey, Karen, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. In your book, and thank you for coming back, you shared some things that made me lean in. You know, you talked about your dad being abusive to you and you accepting it. You talked about 2016 and going, I kind of knew this was my country, but okay, shrug. 2020, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and you're like, something's wrong. And now I can no longer just sit back. But there are roughly 70 million Americans willing to, maybe more this time. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if more voted for him again, because more voted for him in 2020. Where are we right now, and how do we reckon with that reality that you talk about in your book?
Yeah, well, I think what we're really seeing, right, is a lot of white folks are really willing to just take the ship down rather than share, right? Like I feel like that's my understanding really of the folks that are still on board for folks like Trump and Vance.
Do you really think they think the ship is going down? Do you think they've processed that the ship is sinking?
I think they have a sense that they are no longer sort of, in terms of law, given the same kind of privileges that their parents or grandparents had, right? And so they feel that they've lost, right? Because some of the things legally have shifted. Some of the stuff around employment discrimination has shifted, right? I mean, employment discrimination didn't become illegal till the 60s, right? So for folks.
So pause for a second. So pause. So their parents and grandparents worked in places where Black folk and others were denied employment legally, or denied, like Trump denying housing because of the complexion of somebody. You could do that, or Trump got sued, but still you could do it in a de facto way, right?
Right.
And now there were places you can sue people for doing that now, right?
Right.
Until affirmative action got overturned, but that's another
well,
story.
I think particularly in places like the Rust Belt, I come from Michigan, I'm in Detroit right now, and we kind of often lose sight of this, that for white folks, right, there was a really serious social contract in the Rust Belt, right? If you had a union job, right, you could get into the middle class for free with the education you got from government, right? So you get through high school and then you get into the factory and you're going to have an okay life, right? You're going to be stable. Your kids probably can go to college if they want to. Maybe you don't have a huge house, but you maybe have a little cabin like up on the lake or something, right? And it was just sort of on autopilot, right? Like that's sort of the life that my grandfather had on my mom's side. And I love my grandpa, but like this was not a man who was strategizing about how to get into college and sort of, jerry-rigging everything to figure out how to get a mortgage or all that, right? It was just sort of like quick and easy and you could do it, right? And that's changed for folks. And we have not done a good job in this country of talking about why that changed, right? And so I think a lot of folks, like white folks like that are me, if I didn't go out and go to college and learn about the world and things like that, right? That sort of go, it used to be easier. Why is it harder now? And we have not talked about the ways that we've let capitalism get more punishing and difficult and how all that stuff is working, right? And just sort of let it go along. And then you have folks like Trump come out and say, oh, you think it's hard now? Well, that's because Black people and immigrants are taking your jobs, right? And give this ready thing. And there's enough white supremacy in our culture, I think, that it's already sort of primed for that. So you're like, oh, right. I knew it. I knew there was a reason, right? And then that sort of gives passageway, right? To sort of be like, yeah, this is the person who's talking about why this stuff is hard. Because I mean, let's be clear, right? Like up through the 2016 election, the Democrats were not talking very earnestly with folks in the Rust Belt about why stuff looked the way it did. It was much more like, oh, it's so terrible that NAFTA happened and your jobs went away. Like you could go get another one. I mean, that's not a very satisfactory answer. Right? It's kind of talking down to folks a bit. And they didn't take well to that. And then you're primed, right, for this explanation that's because other people are taking it, not because we let the system get worse.
You know what's weird about this whole Mexican black people took your jobs, that white people self-segregate in massive numbers. So they live in places where they don't have to see a black person or a Mexican unless they're doing their lawn, taking care of their children, or wiping their meemaw's ass. They don't really have to engage. And unless a spare black person like a Skip Gates or a Clarence Thomas moves into the neighborhood because they have money or not, just happy to be around. And then they make room for the special Negro, because that Negro's not trying to be more than, they know their place. You know what I'm saying? But the reality is, if you're living in this homogeny, how do you blame somebody else for your lack of success?
Well, I mean, but you understand and that you are unstable, right? Like I think that it's often for folks, I don't think it's because in their day-to-day, it's actually threatened. It's this general sense that there's no net to catch you when you fall, right? And that things are a lot harder than they used to be, right?
But I thought they were against handouts. I thought they don't like entitlements.
That is the language that gets used, yes, but I don't think that's a very honest description of what the problem is. I mean, most white families have been perfectly fine getting help from government when it was for them. GI
I'm being
Bill.
Facetious. Yes, I'm being facetious because the hypocrisy is stunning. And when we say it out loud, it's like nobody wants to say, oh, I'm being a hypocrite right now, unfair, because the default in this country is racist or bigotry. That's the default. That's the set way. I want to try to, and the reason why I had you back on is to figure out what kind of language, I'm listening to this book, The Barn, and it is, oh my God, it is making me angry. But at the same time, as I'm leaning in and the author is brilliant, I'm realizing that education has failed in this country. The spaces where we should have these conversations, like in Mississippi, a teacher wanted to give an assignment to research Emmett Till. The children went home talking to their parents, trying to get information. And as you reared back, that teacher had to stop doing that under threat of losing her job, and parents cussed her out. How dare you give that assignment to my children? Is that part of it? I think about the lack of education, because we should be having a conversation about the GI Bill and the New Deal, leaving out farm workers and domestic work, people that work in people's homes. That's all black people back then, right? That was on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the hand up was just for you. We don't talk about the covenant laws. That should be in schools too, where redlining and covenant laws specifically keep people in these places and out of these places, right? And now that you can't do it, you're mad. Is that fair? Like, we should be having that conversation.
Our failure to have an honest conversation about the role of racism and particularly white supremacy in public policy throughout the 20th century, right? I mean, obviously the enslavement era that's a whole thing, but you don't even have to go back that far, right? You can just stick with the 20th century, right? And you got the GI Bill, Fair Labor Standards Act, housing discrimination, all this stuff, right, that we built into public policy or government allowed in private practice. I was shocked when I was working on the white bonus, where, my family had always said we moved to the district I grew up in because we wanted good schools. That's what we needed. And I figured out in the course of reporting the book that actually what had happened is we fled an integrating district, right, that had been fighting integration for 13 years since 1968. In 1981, January, it integrates. and my family picks up and moves in June to a failing district, right? I had no idea. Nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever told me that in 1970, the Klan blew up 10 school buses in Pontiac, nobody in them, right? But blew up 10 school buses to try to prevent school integration from taking place, right? So you grow up with that in your world and nobody ever tells you. So I'm like out here like a white lady trying to be decent, and I have no idea what has happened or why the Black folks around me might be maybe a little hesitant about talking to me and my family, because I don't know that history, right? I have no idea. I mean, for me, the failure of my parents and grandparents to be honest about just what has happened so that we can build together and move forward, right? I feel like that's like just been really appalling to me.
Why would they do that though? If the goal is to keep the leg up, to keep the privilege, why would you want your child to know that you somehow got something that nobody else, that Black folk weren't able to get? And now we've added a Latino class in the 70s, because that didn't exist on the census until the 70s. Nixon was like, how can we further divide these people? Okay, let's add
Right.
Hispanic, Latino, so then they could feel like they're in a special class, even though we see them all as the N-word, all of them. How do you have that conversation with your why would you do that?
I mean, if you're explicitly seeking to segregate resources like that, you wouldn't, right? I was not raised in a family that said we were racist, right? My family says, I don't see color, race doesn't matter, we're all equal. We're going to watch Sesame Street. We're going to give you books about how everybody's equal. We're going to make sure that you have like this nice idea that everybody's created equal, and we believe in that, right? I learned that in school. But then actually what the history is really different. I think for me, that hypocrisy and bringing up kids like that, right, is just so angry, right, as an adult, to look back and be like, was Sesame Street just a cruel joke? Like, you don't believe in that at all? Like, you really don't think we should share? You don't think we should really be friends or know people that aren't like us? Like, what, I mean, and how do you build a functioning multiracial democracy if you have been lying to most of the, like, to the white population, the kids, like, for most of their lives about what's actually happening?
Right.
Right? Like, how do you fix it?
And to not tell your children that Sesame Street was created because of race, for Black, inner city Black children to be able to see themselves, or to have a different kind of, it was created for that purpose. We don't even know that.
No, my family do not talk about that.
So Tracie McMillan, author of The White Bonus. We have less than 2 weeks till Election Day. I'm still seeing more than half of white women in the bag for Trump. How do we talk about do we just say they're done? Because they're like Lucy with the football. They have done this many. Oh, you're like, oh, they wore the pussy hats. Yay, maybe. Oh, okay. Maybe this is it. And then you see 2020 exit polls. You're like, they voted more than voted the second time. What is happening? Now the reproductive rights are on many ballots, and it's on the ballot. I don't trust them. I don't trust y'all, Tracie. I don't trust y'all to step up and do what's right for your progeny. I just don't. So what kind of conversation can we have, or what conversations are being had that you're hearing?
Right. I mean, I will say the white women that I know mostly are folks who are on board, like, to not elect Trump. I have a few folks in my circle that are talking about third-party voting in Michigan, which is folks I'm trying to engage in conversation, because it's really dangerous and self-absorbed to do that. I've appreciated how you're talking about voting right, that it's about strategy and about making that sure that we have better space in which to operate and push for things to get better, right? Honestly, with the research that I've done, I don't think there's a lot of convincing the folks who are already voting. Where there's room to push as folks that are not necessarily thinking about voting and might sit it out. I think that's the difference. I think that's where you make difference. I don't think somebody who has already been on board and knows that they want to support the Republican ticket, that's where or if they're just real, like, unsure, if they're real unsure, I think probably what they mean is they don't want to say that they don't want to vote Democrat,
is this about politics? Because I've been saying it's probably never been about politics. The fact that there was a Southern strategy tells me it was never about politics. It was always about preserving whiteness. It was never
Right.
about
Preserving,
politics.
hoarding resources.
Right, because if we're talking about fiscal responsibility under Republicans, our spending has been through the roof. It has been irresponsible, to say the least. The Democrats have balanced the budget. Hell, Clinton handed over a surplus. Bush drove us into a ditch. Obama saved the auto industry and brought us back out. Trump drove us into a ditch. Oh, Biden has helped. We were supposed to be in a recession. That hasn't happened. I'm just, the lie about, I'm voting for fiscal responsibility and smaller government. It's never been about politics. It's always been about
No,
race.
it's certainly not in my lifetime. It's not really been about politics, certainly. And the research I've done bears that out. Right. I mean, and all the social science about Republican voters is folks that are identifying with that party. The strongest predictor is being racist, right? Is to hold
Right.
racial hostility against Black folks. That's the strongest, one of the strongest predictors.
I think the Democrats should double down on that and just lean into that's what this is. Because from Willie Horton to the welfare queen to, and we can talk about the crime bill, which is, Clinton and all that, but the tropes around the boogeyman, the Mexicans with Trump on the escalator, it's always been about demonizing the other. Haitians now eating cats and dogs. They tried that, backfired a little bit. Maybe there's still people thinking that the Haitians are the problem. It has been about this racial disharmony and just creating more and more wedges. And is there hope, Tracie, as you look out, among the women that you come in contact with? Because, you can move freely about the cabin. Are you hopeful, or are you?
I would
Not.
say I'm biting my nails and hoping that it goes all right. I mean, I think that there is enough of a coalition of white folks who do not want Trump in office. And then the folks who are going to everybody will get hurt, I think, if Trump gets elected, but folks who are not white are going to get hurt a lot more. And so I think, that's why you see polls line up the way that they do along race lines. And so I think there's enough of a coalition now that it's possible to keep Trump from gaining office. But my racial brothers and sisters have not, they don't give me a lot of optimism. I think it's more about turnout, helping get out the vote, for folks that are likely to vote Democrat. And hopefully that's some more white ladies, but
you don't even know.
I don't know. Because the nature of my life, I don't know a ton of people. Even the folks that I know who are just white folks I grew up with who are not particularly engaged politically, even those folks don't go Trump, right? They're just sort of working class folks who are well, I guess I'll maybe I won't vote, a pox on all their houses type of thing. That's real common. But
okay, all right.
I wish I had better news for you.
Yeah, me too. Because we don't pre-screen, we don't have these pre-conversations. I was hopeful, but it is what I suspected, which means that we have to show up in numbers that we've never shown up for before. And I'm encouraged by the early voting records that are being broken. We're not in a pandemic, so 2020 I got that. The early voting is really encouraging because that speaks to something. But white women, y'all. Oh. I'm wondering, because I'm thinking back to the position when you talked about your dad being abusive and you sitting with that. Can you walk us through a little bit of how you broke free from accepting that?
Sure. I just got sick of it.
What was there one breaking point? Because was there one thing that you were like, okay, enough?
With any difficult relationship, right? There's ebbs and flows. So I've gone through a number of rounds with my dad where we stopped talking for a while. And then we come back, because the thing that would keep pulling me back, right? I mean, because I first broke with him when I was like 17, 18 in college, right? He kicked me out of his house. And I was like, great, that's it, fine. I'll just go be on my own in New York at 18 without a degree or any ability to support myself, and it'll be fine, right? It was not fine, it was very hard. But what kept pulling me back, right, is the broader web of family, right? Because the rest of my family still connected with my dad, doesn't have the same issues with him that I do. And you see a lot of the gaslighting, right, that often happens in abusive situations. And just figuring out over time that I do not have the temperament to keep sort of like holding that and allowing that to continue without talking about it. Like I would be fine talking to my dad and being like, look, hard things happen. We have all not been our best selves. And like, let's talk about it, and that's not what my dad really is down for, which means I can't have a relationship with him. And, I think when I started working on the white bonus, I had this idea that maybe me and my family can have this kind of conversation more broadly. As a country, we can have this, right? Because I do think that there's like a parallel between like at-home abuse is like this microcosm of social abuse, right? Which I think you can say racism is a form of abuse, right?
Correct.
So it's like, maybe we can do this. And that didn't work out with my dad, but that's one dude, right? And I think that there are enough people, when I think about, can I have hope or something, like there actually are enough people who get that like living in an abusive relationship is not fun, either for the abuser or the victim, right? It's not good for anybody. I think there's enough people that get that we actually can build something better as a country. And, and I've been able to build in part because I found like a really amazing partner, right? To build like a good, strong relationship that's just like, all right, sometimes we're going to mess up and we'll just have a conversation about it and move on with our day. And I would love to see our country get more like that too, right? To be like, we're going to have some disagreements, but you know what? The point is we're all equal here. We don't want anybody to be disrespected or abused. And then we're just going to keep it moving. So I hope about that, and I think it's possible. I don't know that means it will happen, but I think it's possible.
I agree. Let's touch and agree on that note. Tracie McMillan, I appreciate the work that you're doing with yourself, but also the work you're doing to try to help the rest of this population get some enlightenment. The White Bonus is the book. Thank you for coming back, Tracie McMillan.
Thanks for your work.
Yes, thank you. Tracie IE, by the way, TRACIE McMillan.
My days are cooler, nights are warmer, and I put the blame on you. Time moves slow, but my heart beats faster. When these eyes are looking right at you, you give me something to believe in, just what I needed. You're the closest.